New York City, early March 1888, showed no signs of the disaster to come. The streets were as vibrant as ever, children chasing each other over cobblestones, vendors hawking their wares, women in long wool coats hurrying past with swinging market baskets. The north wind was sharp, but that was nothing new. The city was well accustomed to it. And the harbor ferries settled back and forth across the water between Brooklyn and Manhattan, their whistles echoing between the piers. Overhead, the elevated railways rumbled, iron wheels sparking against the rails in the dull morning light. Horse-drawn streetcars moved steadily along their tracks, carrying clerks, dock workers, and school children through bustling blocks. The city's rhythm was brisk, hurried, full of sound. Yet, a careful observer might have noticed subtle portents. The clouds gathered in unusual formations. The air tasted sharper, more biting, carrying an unnatural stillness. Farmers outside the city noted birds flying lower than usual, desperately searching for food. Sailors on the docks tightened their moorings, sensing a change in the weather. But from most New Yorkers, these warm ear whispers in the background. That evening, warm light glowed from apartment windows. Gas lamps flickered in the wind along Broadway. Newspapers casually mentioned an impending snowfall. Perhaps an inch or two, nothing more. Families went to sleep, never imagining that by daylight their city would be transformed. The calm was deceptive, for beneath it, the storm was gathering its strength. Dawn on March 11, 1888, broke with the city waking under a leaden sky. Heavy clouds hung low over the skyline, as if pressing down on the rooftops. The first snowflakes fell quietly, swirling like delicate lace in the air. I clung to iron railings, the shoulders of passers-by, the brims of ladies' hats. At first people smiled. Snow was no stranger to New York. A light March flurry was almost charming. Children tilted their faces upward, catching flakes on their tongues. But the flakes didn't stop. They grew thicker, faster, flying sideways in a rising wind. By 9 or 10 in the morning, the streets were growing slick. Carriage wheels spun, horses strained against their loads, and sweepers tried in vain to keep the main arteries clear. The snow now stung, biting the skin, and the air turned piercingly cold. By the ferry slips, men watched the East River churn and muttered. Commuters from Brooklyn pulled their coats tighter, squinting against flakes that seemed to bite rather than melt. Elevated railway platforms began to frost over, and even the iron girders groaned with a sudden chill. Still, many paid it no mind. A late season blizzard, people said, pulling their scarves higher. Shops remained open, schools stayed in session, gas lamps shone bravely in the midday gloom. Yet, as the hours passed, the snow only grew deeper. Flakes no longer fell but were swept sideways by winds that howled like ghosts through the alleys. The city that had awakened under a gray sky now vanished behind a white curtain, and the storm was just beginning. By evening, the snowfall had become unhinged. It began as gentle flurries now raged with a fury that unsettled even the most seasoned New Yorker. Things howled down Broadway, tearing at hats and coats, whipping snow into blinding sheets. Windows rattled in their frames, shutters flamed against brick walls. The sound was a constant roar, a reminder from nature of the city's fragility. On the streets, carriages struggled. Horses exhaled plumes of white steam, shying unstumbling as snowdrifts buried their legs up to the knees. Drivers shouted, voices swallowed by the gale, wheels stuck, carts overturned. Those who had ventured out for errands or work found themselves disoriented. Familiar streets disappeared beneath churning white. Landmarks were erased, as if the city were being wiped clean and redrawn by the snow. The ferries were the first to yield. By dusk, the waters of the East River grew treacherous, and captains dared not risk the crossing. The piers, once alive with whistles and shouts, fell eerily silent. Commuters were stranded, helplessly gazing across at a city vanishing behind the blizzard's veil, and homes and apartments burned weakly behind frost-laced glass. Families drew closer to their stoves, listening to the storm batter the walls. Conversations grew hushed. The newspaper's casual forecast now seemed a cruel error. This was no ordinary snowfall. As night fell, the storm's trooper revealed itself. The snow fell so densely it seemed the very air had solidified, pressing down on every rooftop, every alley, every shuddering pane of glass. The city was no longer merely experiencing a storm, it was under siege. That Sunday, night fell early, though it was hard to tell when day ended, for the sky had been gloomy since morning. As the storm intensified, New York City sank into a strange twilight, lit only by the struggling glow of gas lamps fighting through the swirling white. Their halos illuminated only a few feet before being swallowed by the tempest, casting ghostly rings in the flying snow. Streets once bustling and alive fell silent save for the howl of the wind. Drifts rose higher than doorsteps, pressed against storefronts, buried signs. The earth that opened inward were blessing, those that opened out were blacked by walls of snow. Horses abandoned by their drivers stood shivering, icicles hanging from their manes. The few pedestrians still outside hunched as the gale, scarves frozen stiff, lashes caked with frost. Indoors, families huddled together, walls groaning as if the buildings themselves struggled under the snow's weight. Hailstones roared, but the cold seeped in through every crack, a constant, relentless presence. Children were wrapped in extra blankets, while parents spoke in low, anxious tones about dwindling supplies and the danger of venturing out. Yet, some had no shelter at all. The core of the homeless, those caught mid-minus journey, found themselves seeking refuge in doorways, stairwells, or the corners of train stations, hiding from the biting wind. For them, the night was long and merciless, the snow quietly covering their forms. Above it all, the storm raged, offering no quarter. The snow fell not in flakes but in a deluge, a white wall consuming the city. The blizzard of 1888 had arrived in full force, and New York was sinking under its weight. When midnight struck, New York City had become unrecognizable. Streets that just hours before had teemed with delivery wagons, carriages, and hurried footsteps were now buried under mountains of snow. Broadway, the main thoroughfare, looked less like a city street and more like a frozen canyon, its buildings half linus hidden behind walls of snow. The air was thick with flakes, so dense that sound itself seemed smothered. Even the constant rumble of the elevated railways fell silent. The tracks clogged, the trains abandoned. Only the wind remained howling. To treat around corners, shutter shutters whistled through cracks in tightly sealed windows. It sculpted the drifts into strange shapes, arches, ridges, curling spires that leaned like frozen waves, threatening to collapse at any moment. Lampposts were half-minus buried, their light nearly invisible in the blizzard, casting wavering phantoms in the swirling snow. Here and there, solitary figures still struggled forward, bundled in wool, moving with desperation. Each step sank boots deep into the snow, practice measured in inches rather than blocks. Some carried lanterns, swinging dimly in the gale, flames threatening to die. Others had given up the fight entirely, stumbling into churches or taverns, places whose doors remained open, offering refuge from the cold. Yet, for most of the city, it was no more movement. Windows went dark, doors were bolted, hearth fires tended as best they could. The city that never seemed to sleep had been forced into stillness, wrapped in the suffocating silence of the snow. It was a silence fraught with unease, for everyone knew in their hearts that the storm had only just begun, i.e. early hours of March 12th. The elevated railways, once the proud arteries of the city, stood frozen, their tracks buried in ice and snow. Trains that had set out hopefully in the morning were now stranded, cars abandoned or packed with shivering passengers who had no choice but to wait. Those were locked, iron grinding uselessly against iron, the strongest engines unable to push through the impassable drifts. Some passengers tried forcing doors open only to be met with a wall of snow packed tight against the car. A few managed to climb down, stumbling into the storm. But the streets below offered no more safety. The high platforms became cages of iron and ice, where the wind lashed without mercy. In the stations below, people crowded into waiting rooms, stoves glowing red but offering little relief from the tow. Mothers wrapped children in shawls. Newsboys handed out spare editions, the newsprint quickly used as makeshift blankets. At major hubs like Grand Central Depot, chaos reigned. Telegraph lines had already begun to fail, and trains meant to carry passengers out of the city never arrived. Men paced the platforms, staring into the blizzard as if expecting the black outline of a locomotive to suddenly appear. But nothing came. These machines of steel, symbols of progress and speed, had been forced into utter silence. The blizzard had paralyzed them, trapping thousands in a city that was shrinking, hour by hour, into a snowbound island. Dawn on March 12 struggled to arrive, but the East River, usually choppy and busy with ferries and cargo ships, was now choked with ice. Winds had driven great sheets of ice together, grinding and pressing until the water seemed to disappear under a jagged, white plain. Ferries that had dared to cross the night before were now wrapped. Axwork eroded in snow, smokestacks caked to knife. Some were stranded mid-Minas River. Crews huddled below decks, unable to go forward or back. The Manhattan waterfront was empty and quiet, only frozen ropes creaking on wooden pilings. This area, normally filled with the sounds of whistles, shouts, and the steady slap of oars, felt like a silent graveyard. Longshoremen bundled in heavy coats, hands deep in pockets, stared incredulously at the frozen expanse. For Brooklyn commuters, the river had become an impassable barrier. Thousands who relied on the ferries to reach Manhattan were utterly cut off. Some tried walking across the frozen river, only to find the ice dangerously brittle, cracking underfoot. Rescue teams patrolled the shores, pulling desperate people back to safety, their shouts quickly swallowed by the storm. Hips anchored in the harbor fared no better. Snow piled high on decks, sails frozen stiff as boards, rigging groaning under layers of frost. Captains lit lanterns that swung dimly in the gale, signaling their presence to any who might still dare navigate the channels, but few did. New York had always been a city connected by its waters, but now those waters had become walls of ice. The island of Manhattan was trapped, wrapped in snow from above and ice from below, its lifelines severed. By 9 or 10 o'clock on the morning of March 12, another of the city's lifelines failed, the telegraph lines. For decades, the click-clack of Morse code had connected New York to the wider world, transmitting news, orders, and reassurance in an instant. But now, under the weight of ice and the fury of the wind, the wires snapped one by one, heavy cables sagging, then breaking with a report like gunfire. Poles tilted dangerously over streets, their tops swaying like fragile twigs. Some fell completely, sinking with a muffled thud into the drifts. Others whipped violently in the wind, wires sparking as they collided. And the messages that had been traveling along those lines, business deals, family letters, urgent alerts, all fell silent. In telegraph offices, operators sat at their desks waiting, fingers poised over keys, but the machines no longer chattered. The lines to Boston, Philadelphia, Washington all were at ed. Flex at Western Union paced nervously before the stove, rubbing their hands, shaking their heads at the growing reports of line failures. For the first time in years, New York found itself cut off, not only from its neighbors but from the world. Newspapers, always hungry for the latest news, fell silent as well. Without telegraphs, there was no fresh information to print. Editors sat before blank copy, pressmen waiting for words that would never come. Citizens accustomed to the constant hum of information were left with rumor. Speculation was exchanged in low tones in taverns and apartments, each tale more fearful than the last. The city began to feel like an island, not just surrounded by ice rivers and snowdrifts, but isolated in every sense. The sound of its connection to the outside world had been cut. The blizzard was no longer merely a storm. It was a wall of silence, a curtain drawn between New York and the rest of humanity. By late morning, New York's streets had become a maze of drifts and abandoned conveyances. Wagons were half-minus buried, wheels frozen, horses long since lead to whatever stables could be found. Some animals had simply fallen where they stood, bodies stiff under a white blanket, silent witnesses to the storm's cruelty. Pedestrians who dared venture out found themselves in an altered world. Sidewalks disappeared under drifts taller than a man. To move forward was to climb, stagger, and sink again. Every step was a battle with snow that clung like quicksand. Street signs vanished, landmarks blurred, whole neighborhoods seemed to dissolve into the blizzard's endless white, and muffled their mouths with scarves, pulled tight until their breath froze on the fabric. Women cut their skirts and lifted them high, but it did to stop the snow from seeping into boots and stockings. Children cried into the wind, small hands clutching at parents who struggled to stay upright themselves. Those who sought warmth ducked into taverns, shops, or churches, strangers huddling together, shaking snow from coats, faces flushed from the cold. The interiors of these places glowed dimly, candles and stove fires fighting the chill that crept in with every open door. Conversations were hushed as people shared stories of who had made it home, who had not, who was still wandering the white chaos. For many, the journey was simply too much. They stopped, curling up in doorways or under stoops, closing their eyes as exhaustion dragged them toward sleep. But in such cold, sleep was a greater danger than the storm itself. The snow showed no mercy to those who rested, and so the streets filled with figures moving slowly, endlessly, seeking shelter that might or might not be found. The city that had thrived on motion and speed now crawled. Cold. Each step was a struggle against nature's relentless hand. In New York's homes and apartments, life clung stubbornly to warmth and light. Coal stoves hissed and roared, casting a reddish glow, chasing shadows from the corners of rooms. Families pressed close together, sharing body heat, speaking in low tones to soothe children whose eyes were wide with wonder and fear. The smell of burning coal mingled with the faint scent of damp wool and wet boots, creating an atmosphere that was both cozy and heavy with the weight of the storm outside. Buffets flickered as wind rattled the panes, flames bending and dancing in the draft. In wealthier households, warmth was more stable, fires fed with neatly split wood, rooms insulated from the snow pressing against the walls. In tenements and small flats, the battle against the cold was harder. Windows rattled, thin walls trembled, and even the thickest blankets sometimes failed to keep the chill at bay. From night into morning, families performed quiet rituals of survival. Mothers stirred pots over small flames, brewing tea, making soup. Fathers cleared snow from doorways, trying to maintain some connection to the street. Children, bundled and shivering, played softly with wooden toys or listened to stories told by elders, distractions from the biting cold. Every crackle of the fire, every faint flicker of lamplight, was a small victory against the storm's relentless power. Yet, even here, the storm could not be ignored. Every gust that shook the windows was a reminder of the fury outside. Every drift that grew higher outside the door whispered of isolation, of a city cut off from its accustomed rhythms. The night was long and oppressive, but within the warm glow of lamps and stoves, New Yorkers held on to hope, a fragile, flickering hope, like the flame that kept their homes from freezing entirely. While many sought refuge in warm homes, hundreds of New Yorkers had nowhere to hide from the storm. The city's current homeless were forced to face the blizzard's fall, merciless force. Snow-covered benches, doorways, and alleyways, erasing the familiar spots where one might find a moment's rest. Every gust of wind cut through thin coats and tattered shawls, the cold a physical lake. Some huddled under the eaves of buildings or on the recessed steps of brownstones, pressing together for warmth. Others tried to build small fires with wood chips or newspaper, but the flames died quickly in the damp, frozen air. Their faces were etched with exhaustion and resolve, eyes constantly scanning for a break in the storm or a building that might offer shelter. Petty workers and volunteers did what they could, struggling through the beat snow to deliver blankets, food, and words of comfort. Churches and relief houses opened their doors, taking in those who could reach them. That many were simply too far from safety, trapped in streets made unrecognizable. The snow-swallowed footprints obscured the approach of aid until it was too late. The cold was more than an inconvenience, it was a silent predator. Fingers and toes went numb quickly. Breath froze in the air, and exhaustion threatened to drag even the strongest into a sleep from which they might never wake. Yet, on the faces of the homeless, there remained a stubborn resilience, small acts of kindness, sharing scraps, whispering encouragement to hold on for another hour, to push through one more drift, to survive one more gust. And so, the blizzard revealed both cruelty and courage. Its bitter white fury pressed down upon the helpless, and the human spirit refused to yield entirely to its power. By the afternoon of March 12, entire streets began to vanish under the ever-growing drifts. Porches that once welcomed families and shopkeepers were half buried, some almost completely swallowed by towering white walls. People trying to enter or leave their homes found themselves in a constant battle with the shovel, watching the winding to their labor almost as soon as it was done. Windows were coated with ice, frost forming delicately spans that blurred the view of the street outside. Indoors, candlelight danced on these icy veils, creating a surreal, dreamlike glow that's often the harsh reality of the cold. Every door became a threshold between warmth and the storm's relentless assault, a fragile barrier against a world gone mad with snow. Shopkeepers fought desperately to keep their doors open. Bread, coal, and milk were in high demand, and some ventured out into the storm to deliver essentials, picking their way carefully through streets where snow was knee-inch deep or higher. Yet, every delivery was a battle. The snow lashed their faces. The wind threatened to overturn handcarts or tear away packages. Even for those safe indoors, the sight of a snow-blocked porch brought an ease. It was a visible reminder that the storm was more than an inconvenience. It was an overwhelming force, capable of reshaping the familiar world overnight. Families listened to the wind beating at their doors, felt the house shudder, and wondered how much longer the city outside could hold. Yet, behind every snow-blocked porch, there was still life, the constant warmth from stoves and fireplaces, voices speaking softly, offering comfort. The human presence, small but steadfast, remained a counterpoint to the storm's indifferent power. As the blizzard stretched into its second day, the city began to feel the strain of dwindling supplies. The lifeline of warmth, was being consumed faster than it could be delivered. In wealthier neighborhoods, stoves burned hot, but required constant feeding. The smell of and coal-smoked fireplaces already thick with worry. In tenements and poorer communities, families faced the real threat of running out of coal entirely, forced to ration what little they had left. Food, too, grew precious. Markets that had been open the first morning were now closed, entrances blocked by snow. Housewives and cooks rummaged through cupboards, planning meals from scraps, turning simple ingredients into nourishing soups and stews. For many, every meal was both sustenance and a small victory, a way to push back the cold that seemed intent on seeping into every corner of life. Street vendors who had once called out their wares to bustling crowds now pushed their carts with difficulty through the drifts, vehicles tilting dangerously under the weight of snow. Their cries carried weakly on the wind, and few had the strength or will to stop. The city's usual commerce had slowed to a crawl. Survival replaced trade as the order of the day. Even water became a challenge. Pipes froze, wells iced over, and fetching water required careful effort and endurance. Mothers balanced buckets carefully, trudging through drifts, while children watched, shivering, hoping for a return with warm water for a sip. Zzz. Everyone's mind a simple task became vital. Despite these challenges, the people of New York endured. There was fear, of course, and exhaustion, but there was also determination. Every fire lit, every meal prepared, every bucket of water carried represented a quiet rebellion against the blizzard's dominion, proof of the stubborn resilience of human life. Through the howling wind, muffled voices began to drift across the snow-covered streets. At first, it was hard to tell if the sounds were real or imagined, whispers of hope or murmurs of despair. Some came from neighbors, calling out to one another to see who had made it through the night, if fires still burned, if warmth still held. Others were cries from stranded pedestrians, lost in the drifts, seeking shelter. The blizzard played tricks on the ears. A shout could be swallowed in an instant, only to return as an eerie echo, as if coming from all directions at once. The snow deadened sound, creating a silence so dense that even footsteps felt distant. Yet, in that strange quiet, the human voice became a small beacon, a marker of life beneath the storm's overwhelming force. Families pressed their faces against frosted windows to listen. Children pointed outside, shivering, imagining the figures as wandering ghosts, while parents murmured reassurance, stirring them away from the temptation to venture out. In some neighborhoods, neighbors took to the streets together, forming parties to help shovel out doorways, check on the sick, and deliver necessities to those who could not move. Even the bravest felt a sense of awe. The wind cut so sharply that words whirred on a way mid-sentence, and drift swallowed feet before progress could be made. Yet, in every attempt there was courage. Every voice that pierced the snow-curtain, every call that traveled to an alley, was a reminder that New York was not yet defeated. Humanity remained, and even in the white chaos, people leaned on one another through whispers, shouts, and gestures, one small act at a time, defying the blizzard. It was March 12 gave way to night once more. The blizzard showed no sign of relenting. In fact, it seemed to grow more violent, as if determined to subdue the city completely. The snow no longer fell in flakes but in swirling sheets, driven by gales that roared like tsunamis. It piled onto rooftops, slid down staircases, swept through alleyways with an almost living force. For many, the second night was the hardest. The first day had been shock and frantic struggle, digging, gathering, enduring. But now, exhaustion set in. Arms ached from shoveling. Bodies trembled from hours of fighting the cold. Even hope grew heavy, sacking under the weight of endless wait. Indoors, families huddled closer than ever. Fires were banked higher, blankets piled thicker, conversations grown quieter still. Some prayed aloud, voices trembling. Others simply stared into the flames, wondering when the storm would end, or if it would end at all. Children, too tired to play, fell asleep on their mothers' laps. Their dreams were filled with drifts and howling winds. In hospitals, doctors and nurses worked by the dim light of lanterns, treating frostbite and exhaustion, doing what they could with limited supplies. Policemen and firemen, those who could still move, patrolled the streets, checking doorways for signs of life. Some rescues came too late, their discoveries a somber reminder of the storm's ruthlessness. And still the snow fell. Hour after hour, it buried the city deeper, erased fences, swallowed lampposts, pressed against windows with a weight that felt like distant thunder. The night seemed to have no end, as if the world had forgotten how to wait. Yet, even in that despair, a strange calm settled over the city. Your Clace Island, still under its icy shell, paused, waiting, enduring. And though no one could see beyond the storm, in every flickering flame and every beating heart, there was a quiet, Unspoken Ruth morning would have to come. It must. When the morning of March 13 finally arrived, it brought little relief. The storm had not ended. It still howled with the same ferocity. But in the weak gray light, the scale of its devastation became clear. New York had been transformed. A city remade by snow and silence. Streets were no longer streets but great trenches dug between white walls. Rifts rose to second-story windows, buried doors, trapped families inside. Whole rows of houses seemed to have vanished, only rooftops suggesting a structure below. Shops and storefronts were sealed behind walls of snow, as if the blizzard had locked the city in a frozen vault. Those who managed to open their doors stepped into a world that felt surreal. Silence passed in from all sides, broken only by the howl of the wind and the low creak of snow shifting under its own weight. People moved cautiously, like explorers in a strange new land, every step sinking deep into the icy powder. Some carried shovels, others lanterns, but all wore the same expression, half disbelief, half determination. Horses and wagons still lay buried where they had been abandoned. Telegraph poles lay snapped and twisted, jutting from the snow like broken ribs. Elevated railway tracks loomed overhead, empty and useless. Their cars sat abandoned, relics of another age. New York, the city of motion, constant noise and bustle, stood still, locked in ice and silence. Yet, even in the wreckage, there were signs of resilience. Smoke rose from chimneys, a promise of life within. Footprints carefully picked their way along narrow paths, connecting neighbor to neighbor. People called out across drifts, voices carried briefly by the wind before disappearing into the white. The blizzard had buried the city. Yes, but it had not buried its people. As the city woke to the reality of its snowbound state, the work of survival truly began. Men and women armed themselves with shovels, picks, even cooking pots, carving narrow tunnels through the snow that blocked their doors. Each strike of nail against ice and snow echoed hollow in the muffled siren. It was a rhythmic rebellion against the storm. Children, bundled in layers of wool, helped as best they could with their mittened hands, scooping snow with tin pails. The work was exhausting. For every path cleared, the wind would sweep in fresh snow to fill it within minutes. Still, the effort continued, because movement meant connection. Neighbors dug toward each other, shouting encouragement as they drew closer, cheering when hands finally met through the snow. Whole blocks became communities united in labor, each of a fuel carrying the promise of shared warmth of surviving together. Indoors, families rationed what they had left. Bread was sliced thinner, broth stretched with every last vegetable, tea used until it surrendered its last hint of flavor. Coal was burned sparingly. Fires were fed just enough to keep the frost from claiming the walls. Every ember mattered. Every sip of warmth was treasured. Elsewhere, volunteer crews tried to clear the main thoroughfares. Broadway, Fifth Avenue, the Bowery became scenes of desperate labor, people working shoulder to carve out passage for emergency wagons and those seeking medical aid. Yet progress was slow, for the drifts rose like walls, and the storm's breath still lashed the city with fury. Through it all, a glimmer of hope flickered. Despite the weariness, despite the cold, the people of New York did not yield. They worked, step by step, cheval by cheval, carving life back into the city the blizzard had tried to erase. For the many who had set out on ordinary errands or journeys before the storm closed its grip, the city had become a vast frozen prison. Train passengers remained trapped in dark cars, their breath condensing in the air, lanterns growing dim as fuel ran out. Ferry passengers who had abandoned ships sought shelter in warehouses along the piers, sleeping on crates, listening to the ice creak against the walls. Hotels filled quickly, lobbies crowded with weary strangers with nowhere else to go. Fruffres word ragged into hallways, blankets spread over armchairs, strangers becoming companions bound by the same fate. For those with money, accommodations were bearable. Dining rooms served stew and coffee, and fires were tended carefully through the night. For the less fortunate, benches, stairwells, even foyers became makeshift beds. Some travelers wandered the streets with lanterns, searching for a place to lay their heads, faces red and raw under layers of frost. Fragment buildings took in as many as they could, but space was scarce, and every fireplace was already crowded with desperate people, the worst stories of shopkeepers opening their doors to let travelers curl up inside, shelves becoming temporary resting places until the storm passed. Perhaps hardest of all were those separated from their families. Fathers who had left Brooklyn for work in Manhattan found themselves trapped on the wrong side of the frozen river, unable to get home. Children waited anxiously at windows for parents who never appeared from the white curtain. Every hour that passed brought deeper worry, for the storm had turned ordinary delays into unbearable separations. New York was a city built on movement, and now it was frozen in place. Travelers, workers, families, all caught between destinations, waited in uncertainty, their only task to hold on until the blizzard showed mercy. By the blizzard's second day, the city's streets no longer resembled streets. They had become deep, winding corridors of snow, silent, undeary. The usual clop of hooves, the creak of wheels, the cries of vendors all were gone. In their place was a heavy, unnatural quiet, broken only by the hiss of falling snow and the wind's uneasy moan around corners. Horses that had not been led to shelter before the storm struck now stood covered in a white mantle. Still, their bodies stiffened motionless under the drift. Wagons were abandoned, was half-minus buried, their loads long forgotten. Even the streetcars, usually so full of life, had vanished beneath snow banks, their tracks erased from sight. To walk the streets was to step into another world. Lantern light glowed weakly from windows above, casting golden halos on the white-minus darkness. While below, people trudged slowly, heads down, wrapped in scarves and shawls. They moved in single file along narrow paths carved earlier in the day, footprints quickly swallowed by the storm. Some carried baskets of bread carefully against the cold. Others bore wood or coal gathered from neighbors. In this strange new silence, every sound carried weight. The scrape of a shovel on stone, the creak of a door opening, a child's muffled cough from behind a scarf. And for those that stopped to look up, the city seemed enchanted. Snow clung to the ironwork of balconies, softened the sharp edges of rooftops, turned gas lamps into glowing orbs shrouded in mist. It was beautiful, in a way, yet beneath the beauty lay the knowledge of hardship, danger, and a city brought to its knees by nature's wrath. New York's heartbeat was still there, but muffled, slowed, as if the city itself were holding its breath, waiting for release. As the storm persisted, the true enemy became not the snow, but the cold itself. It crept into every corner of the city, seeped through shutters, slipped into bedrooms, gnawed at the bones of all who endured. Indoors, frost formed delicate, merciless lace patterns on window panes. Breath hung visible in the air, even inside, and water in basins froze solid overnight. Families huddled around stoves, feeding them coal, wood, anything that would burn, old crates, broken furniture, even newspapers tightly rolled into logs. The fires crackled weakly, not enough to drive the chill away, but enough to keep it from taking complete hold. At night, beds became fortresses of blankets and quilts, children curled together for warmth, parents wrapping arms around them like shields. Still, the cold found ways in. Hands went numb, fingers stiffened, and every cough carried the fear of illness taking root in the lungs. Outside, the cold turned labor into an ordeal. Shoveling became torture, every breath a sting in the chest, every movement slowed by frozen, heavy clothing. Faces turned raw, cheeks chapped, beards hung with icicles, and men spoke with a gentle clenching of their jaws. Those who ventured too far, for too long, risked losing their strength before reaching shelter. Yet, in the struggle, the cold also drew people together. Neighbors invited each other inside to share a fire, a cup of tea, even if the streets was calmed. Strangers would pause, offering a gloved hand when someone fell, pulling them from a drift. It was as if the storm, in all its cruelty, reminded New Yorkers that survival was never meant to be faced alone. At the heart of the blizzard, the city's telegraph lines, the lifelines of communication, had snapped and fallen. With their breaking, New York's connection to the outside world was severed. Information could no longer flow between New York and Boston, Philadelphia, or Washington. For the first time in years, the metropolis was on its own, its voice cut off, its cries for help swallowed by the storm. Under the weight of the snow, telegraph poles leaned like drunken men, wires coiled and tangled in the drifts. Some vanished entirely, buried under snow banks taller than a person, where the wind allowed a glint. Wires hung uselessly, buzzing faintly in the icy gusts. For businesses, the silence was catastrophic. Merchants who relied on daily reports from distant markets had no idea if their goods would arrive. Banks waited uneasily, unable to send or receive transactions, and families suffered the most painful fines of all, for they could send no word to loved ones trapped outside the city. Mothers in Philadelphia waiting for word of a son, husbands in Boston expecting news of a stranded wife, all were left in anxious ignorance. Messengers attempted to cross the buried streets on foot, carrying notes in heavy satchels slung over their shoulders. Some succeeded, trudging door to door, boots sinking knee-minus deep, but many failed. The storm swallowed paths, erased directions, left messengers lost in the blinding white. There were rumors of boys gone missing, their deliveries never completed, small figures swallowed by drifts before reaching their destinations. The silence was more than an inconvenience. It was an injury to a city built on words, trade, constant exchange. The sudden absence of communication pressed down as heavily as the snow itself. Yet, in that silence, neighbors drew closer, voices carried over fences, through tunnels dug in the snow. In the absence of wires, it was the human voice, warm, strained, but alive, that kept the city connected. As night fell once more, the city became a landscape of eerie, dream-like beauty. Gas lamps, half-minus buried in snow, burned weakly behind their glass, casting small halos in the vast white minus dot. But it was not enough. Most streets remained in shadow, the storm still hissing and whispering between drifts. And so, the people of New York lit their lanterns, every household that still had oil lit one, placing it on a windowsill, letting its glow pierce the storm. Flickering flames dotted the city like constellations, guiding lost travelers, offering comfort to those trapped indoors. Children pressed their noses to the glass, watching the lantern sway in the wind, as if they were beacons calling, "We are here. We are holding on. We are waiting for dawn." On the streets, those who dared venture out carrying their own lanterns, the light bobbing up and down as they trudged through the snow. From above, it must have looked like fireflies moving through frozen canyons, disappearing behind white walls, then reappearing in the gloom. Neighbors recognized each other not by face, but by the familiar sway of a lantern. The sight was almost holy. Families gathered around their light, as if it were an altar, murmuring prayers for warmth, food, safety. Even strangers passing a lit window felt a flicker of reassurance. The city, though battered, was still alive, its people still leaning on one another through shared light. And in that fragile glow, New York was, for a moment, not a defeated city, but a place holding its breath, waiting out the storm in silent endurance. As the snow piled ever higher, the sheer weight of it became a danger in itself. Roofs sagged under the heavy burden, beams groaning ominously, as if warning of imminent collapse. In wealthier homes, hired men climbed to the rooftops with shovels, carefully clearing the snow, every step mindful of the icy shingles. Yet, in tenements, families often had to fend for themselves. Mothers and children pushed away what snow they could reach, while fathers risked slipping on the frozen surfaces. The wind lashed fiercely, blowing powdery snow across roofs, obscuring vision, adding new weight with every passing moment. Every creak, every crack of timber was a reminder that danger was not only outside, but above. Observers on the street watched nervously as snow shifted on neighboring roofs. A misplaced step or a sudden collapse could trigger an avalanche pouring down onto the street below, crushing wagons, fences, even unfortunate passers-by. Families held their breath, listening to the ominous groan of planks and beams, while children peeked from windows, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Yet, even in the face of this looming threat, action prevailed. Pebbles scraped, snow was tossed down, neighbors offered a hand in guidance. The city moved cautiously, step by step, clearing paths and roofs, learning to live with the monumental drifts, while protecting life as best it could. Crossing the East River and the Hudson had become a grim ordeal of ice. The bridges, once crowded with carriages, pedestrians, and early streetcars, were now encased in ice, their surfaces slick and treacherous. Anyone attempting to cross had to move with extreme care, boots scraping cautiously, hands gripping frost-minus covered railings. The ice groaned under the weight, emitting ominous creaks, warning of thin spots beneath. Gusts of winds tore across the open spans, cutting through layers of woolen scarves, stinging cheeks and making eyes water. Horses were especially vulnerable. Drivers coaxed them across, brought it reins tightly, and every step was a delicate negotiation with gravity and nature. Ferries were completely out of service, hulls trapped in ice by the docks. Only the bravest or most desperate attempted to cross by small boat, battling wind and churning ice floes. The rivers themselves seemed alive, moving with the rhythm of the storm, as if aware of the struggle in the city above. Despite the danger, these crossings were essential. Families needed supplies. Workers needed to reach vital posts. Information still had to be passed. Each successful crossing was quietly celebrated with sighs of relief and murmured thanks. The bridges, though bound and perilous, became lifelines, connecting a city otherwise divided by snow. When night fell again, the households of New York were bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Gas lamps flickered weakly on the snow-filled streets, but indoors, families gathered around the steady, intimate warmth of candles. Each flicker cast shadows on walls, painting rooms with softly dancing patterns, softening the harshness of the storm outside. Meals were shared quietly. The clink of spoons and bowls was almost drowned by the low roar of the wind. Mothers reminded children to wrap blankets tight. Fathers tended the fire with careful hands. Every ender was nurtured, a tiny defense against the invading cold. Even the simple act of reading aloud a story, a letter, a psalm became a ritual of comfort, weaving warmth and normalcy into an otherwise extraordinary night. Candlelight also offered connection. Neighbors who had managed to carve paths through the snow sometimes shared their light with those nearby, placing a lantern on a doorstep or windowsill to guide travelers safely home. These scattered points of light, like tiny stars, reminded everyone that even in isolation, human presence endured. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent and relentless. Yet, in these candlelit rooms, families found a measure of peace. The night was long and silent, but the soft glow of the flame, coupled with murmured conversation and the shared warmth of bodies, created a small sanctuary, a place where hope could persist. Even beneath the relentless ice and snow, the city's gas lines began to fail. Frost clung to pipes, valves froze shut, and in some neighborhoods, the flow of gas slowed to a trickle or stopped altogether. Families who relied on gas for cooking and lighting faced uncertain evenings, and those already stretched thin by coal shortages struggled even more. Households improvised. Candles and lanterns became essential. Their flames were ended constantly, providing both light and a sense of security. Stoves that depended on gas were replaced by wood or coal fires. Every log was carefully rationed to preserve warmth. Even cooking became a delicate operation, requiring patience and vigilance to keep flames alive and food edible. Repair crews worked tirelessly in the bitter cold, struggling through deep snow to reach broken lines. Their gloved hands fought with tools coated in ice. Every wrench, every valve was encrusted. Despite exhaustion and danger, these men labored on, understanding that their work was crucial to comfort, even survival. In homes, residents adapted, relying on ingenuity and community. Neighbors shared fuel, exchanged lanterns, or offered spare candles, managing to illuminate dark rooms and prepare meals despite the odds. Human resilience shone through, a quiet flame in the face of the blizzard's white fury and frozen infrastructure. As the storm continued unabated, shops across the city were nearly paralyzed. Doors were locked, windows frosted over, entrances blocked by drifts too high for most passers-by to clear. Shopkeepers peered through icy glass, assessing remaining stock, wondering when if they might reopen. Indoor supplies dwindled rapidly. Bread and pastries hardened by the stove, vegetables were carefully rationed, and coal, the lifeline of warmth and cooking, was measured out precisely. Shopkeepers made do, moving goods closer to the fire or melting small chunks of ice to provide water for customers fortunate enough to arrive. Every transaction, no matter how small, was a testament to persistence and human ingenuity. Outside, drifts shifted constantly, paths almost erased as soon as they were cleared. Customers, if they could be called that, were few, venturing out only when necessity demanded. Severed tons, bread carts, and coal deliveries became lifelines. Their arrival brought quiet relief to otherwise empty streets. The shops themselves became microcosms of survival. Candles flickered in frosted windows. Small groups huddled for warmth, and the simple act of exchanging, purchasing, or even sharing goods became a quiet act of defiance against the storm. Though the city was frozen, its people found ways to keep life going, proving that life, however cold and pale, persisted. In the relentless blizzard, New York's postal service was nearly paralyzed. Mail carriers, accustomed to navigating busy streets and blocks, now found themselves wading through snowdrifts knee-deep deep or worse. Letters and parcels that once connected households and businesses were delayed or lost entirely under the snow. In some areas, carriers abandoned their carts entirely, carrying bundles of mail in their arms, picking their way carefully through the white corridors. The wind tore at envelopes, scattering them like fragile leaves across streets and sidewalks. Some letters were soaked or frozen stiff, ink blurred, messages unreadable. Yet, each one held the power of comfort, connection, or reassurance. Families waited anxiously for word from loved ones, pressing faces to frosted windows, imagining the familiar footsteps that would never sound. Children asked repeatedly when the mail would come, voices tinged with worry. In some households, a letter that finally arrived was quietly celebrated, precious not just for its contents but for the reminder that somewhere, someone was thinking of them. For the postal workers, the storm was a relentless test of endurance. They rose before dawn, fought fatigue and frostbite, and pressed on despite the seemingly impossible task. Every letter successfully delivered was a small victory, proof that even in chaos, human connection could not be entirely severed. The blizzard had stopped commerce, travel, and communication, but it could not stop the determination of those who refused to let the city's voice fall silent. By the morning of the storm's third day, windows across the city were coated in frost, turning panes of glass into shimmering landscapes of intricate, white patterns. Every home became a small, self-contained world, the blizzard outside masked by elaborate designs of ice crystals. Indoors, families peered through the icy glass, watching the storm continue its relentless work. Snow drifted like waves across streets, erasing footprints, nearly burying carriages altogether. Children pressed their noses to the cold glass, fogging it with each breath, marveling as familiar streets became an alien, frozen world. Adults, despite their worry, couldn't help but share the awe. The city, for all its hardship, had become strangely beautiful. The frost served another purpose too. It was a barrier. Behind the screen of ice, the warmth of stoves, blankets, and candlelight remained protected from the storm's full force. Families huddled near their windows, finding comfort in watching when movement was impossible. The delicate patterns of the frost reminded them that even in harshness, there was artistry, a fragile balance between beauty and danger. In some neighborhoods, children traced shapes on the glass with gloved fingers, leaving brief messages. "Stay safe," someone wrote, but the wind would erase it within minutes. Yet, the act itself meant something, a small claim on life and hope in the face of a merciless storm. As the blizzard stretched into its fourth day, food shortages began to plague the city. Grocers who had struggled to open in the first 2 days were now nearly empty. House once stacked with bread, milk, vegetables, and meat now stood bare. Remaining stock was reserved for those who could get there early. Families rationed carefully. Bread was sliced paper minus thin, every crumb treasured. Milk was diluted or stretched. Soup made from scraps became the standard meal, and even simple fare felt like victory. Parents whispered instructions to children: eat slowly, save a bite for later, share with the neighbor who has none. The storm had turned everyday abundance into precious scarcity. Delivery carts grew rare, inching through snowdrifts, often hours late or not arriving at all. Some vendors carried what they could by hand, navigating icy paths and snow walls. Horses strained to pull wagons, but weariness and frozen hooves slowed even the strongest animals. Every delivery was a lifeline, met with gratitude and relief. Yet, the blizzard threatened to make each journey impossible. The shortage weighed heavily on the city's morale. Conversations in homes were quiet and measured. Anxiety lingered alongside the warmth of stoves and lantern light. The consumption of every meal was measured against the unknown, against the fear that tomorrow might bring even less. Yet, even in scarcity, New Yorkers showed resilience. They shared what they had, made do, and held onto the belief that the storm, however fierce, would eventually relent, and with it, the city's trial would gradually ease. To the city's laborers, the blizzard brought a trial of both body and spirit. Street cleaners, policemen, and firemen, those who maintained order and safety, faced the storm head-on, their days stretching into infinity, clearing snow, checking on the trapped, handling emergencies. Their uniforms, once practical, were now bulky with layers of wool scarves and heavy boots. Gloves grew wet and stiff, coats weighed down by ice, and every step forward was a fight against deep snow that dragged at legs and threatened to unbalance even the strongest. Shovels scraped at frozen streets, picks chipped at ice, lanterns guided the workers, sight in a world nearly blinded by white. Inside the city, factories had shut down, leaving many workers idle but also trapped. Those who stayed outdoors were often exhausted before the day really began, bodies aching from the repeated battle against wind and snow. Yet, every motion was filled with determination. Streets needed to be cleared, not just for survival but for communication, for supply, for life to resume after the storm. Even brief moments of respite were rare and treasured. A hot drink passed by a pedestrian, a shared cigarette in a brief pause, or a smile from a neighbor offered a spark of humanity in an otherwise relentless ordeal. Every task, every gesture, reinforced the fragile bond between endurance and hope. And so, the workers became the silent backbone of the city, carrying both supplies and spirit through a frozen, a passive world, ensuring that New York remained, at the very least, a city alive. Amidst the overwhelming weight of the blizzard, the city's animals faced their own silent battles for survival. Horses, crucial to transportation and delivery, were blanketed or left in stables, their breath plummeting thick in the crisp air. Many had already succumbed to exhaustion or cold, bodies frozen stiff. Dogs roamed the streets, some faithful companions staying close to their owners, others lost and frightened, paws injured from trudging through knee-deep snow. Cats vanished from their usual alleyways, curling up in hidden nooks for warmth. Emmy was muffled by drifts. Birds grew scarce, huddling in whatever shelter they could find, their chirps a faint counterpoint to the wind's roar. For those who cared for animals, attending was constant. Water froze quickly, forcing repeated trips to supply troughs. Food was rationed, delivered carefully, often through drifts that would slow even the strongest human. The bond between caretaker and creature was tested. Yet, every life saved was a small victory, a reminder that the storm's fury could be resisted. New Yorkers, seeing the animals' plight, often extended a hand of compassion. Neighbors shared hay, blanketed horses, or guided strayed dogs to makeshift shelters. Even amidst fear, hunger, and frost, kindness extended beyond humans. touching the city's living creatures, offering a thread of warmth in an otherwise frozen world. By the blizzard's fourth day, New York's hospitals were under immense strain. Patients arrived with frostbite, exhaustion, and illness, the cold exacerbating conditions. Each was a reminder of the storm's relentless cost. Doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, their hands red and sore from the cold and constant effort, moving between beds and rooms with a quiet urgency. Stoves and fireplaces were pushed to their limit, providing necessary warmth to prevent further suffering. Candles flickered alongside lanterns, illuminating the tense, determined faces of those tending to the sick. Always work routed with makeshift beds, blankets piled thick to preserve heat, the smell of burning coal mingling with those of medicine and salve. Every delivery of supplies, coal, bandages, food, water was a small triumph. Yet, uncertainty remained. These streets slowed the transport of critical medicines, and some families had no choice but to wait, hoping help would reach them. And nurses moved quickly, offering not just medical aid but comfort. Their gentle voices carried reassurance through rooms where the only other sound was the labored breathing of patients. Outside, the storm still raged unabated, pressing down on the city like an invisible hand. In these hospitals, life persisted. The blizzard could freeze streets, trap families, cut communication, yet it could not extinguish the devotion and terror that flowed quietly through these corridors. The human heart, steadfast, remained a warmth no storm could fully conquer. Now, the city's main arteries had become rivers of snow, flowing neither forward nor back, but pooling in deep valleys between white walls. Broadway, once bustling with traffic, resembled a frozen gorge. The tracks left by those who dared to move only marked temporary paths that would disappear within minutes. Brickers and residents moved cautiously, using ropes strung between buildings or along walls as guides. Every step was measured, deliberate, for hidden obstacles, benches, carts. Fallen telegraph poles lurked unexpectedly beneath the snow. Occasionally, the muffled crash of a collapsing building would remind them of the storm's monumental weight, sending them scurrying to safer ground. The snow, piling relentlessly, created both danger and curiosity. Children peeked from windows, imagining vast white landscapes, while adults weighed every outing against necessity. Rude coal, communication required movement. Yet, every venture carried risk. Every alley was a potential trap. Every drift a hidden snare waiting for the unwary. Despite the threats, the city's inhabitants persisted. Shovels scraped, picks chipped, boots sank deep into icy mounds. Every cleared path, every safe passage carved through the frozen maze, was a small victory, a testament to the resilience, courage, and quiet determination that defined New York in the blizzard. As the snow piled higher, the threat of roof collapses became a constant concern. Buildings groaned under the immense weight, beams creaking ominously, as if warning of impending failure. In wealthier homes, hired men climbed to the rooftops with shovels, carefully clearing the snow, every step mindful of the icy shingles. Yet, in tenements, families often had to fend for themselves. Mothers and children pushed away what snow they could reach, while fathers risked slipping on the frozen surfaces. The wind lashed fiercely, blowing powdery snow across roofs, obscuring vision, adding new weight with every passing moment. Every creak, every crack of timber, as a reminder that danger was not only outside, but above. Observers on the street watched nervously as snow shifted on neighboring roofs. A misplaced step or a sudden collapse could trigger an avalanche pouring down onto the street below, crushing wagons, fences, even unfortunate passers-by. Families held their breath, listening to the ominous groan of planks and beams, while children peeked from windows, eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Yet, even in the face of this looming threat, action prevailed. Shovels scraped, snow was tossed down, neighbors offered a hand in guidance. The city moved cautiously, step by step, clearing paths and roofs, learning to live with the monumental drifts, while protecting life as best it could. Crossing the East River into the Hudson had become a grim ordeal of ice. The bridges, once crowded with carriages, pedestrians, and early streetcars are now encased in ice, their surfaces slick and treacherous. Anyone attempting to cross had to move with extreme care, boots scraping cautiously, hands scraping frost in the scovered railings. The ice groaned under the weight, emitting ominous creaks, warning of thin spots beneath. Theft of wind tore past the open spans, cutting through layers of woolen scars, stinging cheeks and making ice water. Horses were especially vulnerable. Drivers coaxed them across, holding reins tightly. Every step was a delicate negotiation with gravity and nature. Ferries were completely out of service, hulls trapped in ice by the docks. Only the bravest or most desperate attempted to cross by small boat, battling wind and churning ice floes. The rivers themselves seemed alive, moving with the rhythm of the storm, as if aware of the struggle in the city above. Despite the danger, these crossings were essential. Families needed supplies. Workers needed to reach vital posts. Information still had to be passed. Each successful crossing was quietly celebrated with sighs of relief and murmured thanks. The bridges, though as bound and perilous, became lifelines, connecting a city otherwise divided by snow. When night fell again, the households of New York were bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Cross lamps flickered weakly on the snow-filled streets. But indoors, families gathered around the steady, intimate warmth of candles. Each flicker cast shadows on walls, painting rooms with softly dancing patterns, softening the harshness of the storm outside. Meals were shared quietly. The clink of spoons and bowls was almost drowned by the low roar of the wind. Mothers reminded children to wrap blankets tight. Fathers tended the fire with careful hands. Every ember was nurtured, a tiny defense against the invading cold. Even a simple act of reading aloud after a letter, a psalm became a ritual of comfort, within one thing not off into an otherwise extraordinary night. Candlelight also offered connection. Neighbors who had managed to carve paths through the snow sometimes shared their light with those nearby, placing a lantern on a doorstep or windowsill to guide travelers safely home. These scattered points of light, like tiny stars, reminded everyone that even in isolation, human presence endured. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent and relentless. Yet, in these candlelit rooms, families found a measure of peace. The night was long and silent, but the soft glow of the flame, coupled with murmured conversation and the shared warmth of bodies, created a small sanctuary, a place where hope could persist. Even beneath the relentless ice and snow, the city's gas lines began to fail. Frost clung to pipes, valves froze shut, and in some neighborhoods, the flow of gas slowed to a trickle or stopped altogether. Families who relied on gas for cooking and lighting faced dim, uncertain evenings, and those already stretched thin by coal shortages struggled even more. Households improvised. Candles and lanterns became essential. Their flames were ended constantly, providing both light and a sense of security. Stoves that depended on gas were replaced by wood or coal fires. Every log was carefully rationed to preserve warmth. Even cooking became a delicate operation, acquiring patience and vigilance to keep flames alive and food edible. The repair crews worked tirelessly in the bitter cold, struggling through deep snow to reach broken lines. Their gloved hands fought with tools coated in ice. Every wrench, every valve was encrusted. Despite exhaustion and danger, these men labored on, understanding that their work was crucial to comfort, even survival. In homes, residents adapted, relying on ingenuity and community. Neighbors shared fuel, exchanged lanterns, or offered spare candles, managing to illuminate dark rooms and prepare meals despite the odds. Human resilience shone through, a quiet flame in the face of the blizzard's white fury and frozen infrastructure. As the storm continued unabated, shops across the city were nearly paralyzed. Doors were locked, windows frosted over, entrances blocked by drifts too high for most passers-by to clear. Shopkeepers peered through icy glass, assessing remaining stock, wondering when if they might reopen. Indoors, supply dwindled rapidly. Bread and pastries hardened by the stove. Vegetables were carefully rationed, and coal, the lifeline of warmth and cooking, was measured out precisely. Shopkeepers made do, moving goods closer to the fire or melting small chunks of ice to provide water for customers fortunate enough to arrive. Every transaction, no matter how small, was a testament to persistence and human ingenuity. Outside, drifts shifted constantly, paths almost erased as soon as they were cleared. Customers, if they could be called that, were few, venturing out only when necessity demanded. Milk wagons, bread carts, and coal deliveries became lifelines. Their arrival brought quiet relief to otherwise empty streets. The shops themselves became microcosms of survival. Candles flickered in frosted windows. Small groups huddled for warmth, and the simple act of exchanging, purchasing, or even sharing goods became a quiet act of defiance against the storm. Though the city was frozen, its people found ways to keep life going, proving that life, however cold and pale, persisted. In the relentless blizzard, New York's postal service was nearly paralyzed. Mail carriers, accustomed to navigating busy streets and blocks, now found themselves wading through snowdrifts knee-inch deep or worse. Letters and parcels that once connected households and businesses were delayed or lost entirely under the snow. In some areas, carriers abandoned their carts entirely, carrying bundles of mail in their arms, picking their way carefully through the white corridors. The wind tore at envelopes, scattering them like fragile leaves across streets and sidewalks. Some letters were soaked or frozen stiff, ink blurred, messages unreadable. Yet, each one held the power of comfort, connection, or reassurance. Families waited anxiously for word from loved ones, pressing faces to frosted windows, imagining the familiar footsteps that would never sound. Children asked repeatedly when the mail would come, voices tinged with worry. In some households, a letter that finally arrived was quietly celebrated, precious not just for its contents but for the reminder that somewhere, someone was thinking of them. For the postal workers, the storm was a relentless test of endurance. They rose before dawn, fought fatigue and frostbite, and pressed on despite the seemingly impossible task. Every letter successfully delivered was a small victory, proof that even in chaos, human connection could not be entirely severed. The blizzard had stopped commerce, travel, and communication, but it could not stop the determination of those who refused to let the city's voice fall silent. Now, the wind had become a constant presence, a living entity that swept through the city with eerie precision. It howled down streets, rattled shutters, bent lampposts, and whipped snow into blinding sheets that seemed determined to erase every trace of human life. Indoors, the wind's roar penetrated walls, finding cracks and crevices. It chilled rooms that should have been warmed by stoves. Families drew closer together, listening to the storm's eerie music, sometimes mournful, sometimes almost gleeful, but always powerful. Children imagined giants tossing snow over the city, while adults felt the sheer indifference of the storm's weight. Even outside, the wind dictated movement. Every step forward was a fight against its force. Every call to a neighbor was quickly swallowed, returning only faintly as an echo. Shovels lifted and fell with the gusts. Lantern flames flickered violently, threatening to die under the whitest alt. If one could pause long enough to listen without fear, there was beauty in the sound too. It was the voice of winter, of a city transformed, a force of nature beyond control. And in that presence, New Yorkers learned patience, endurance, and the quiet acceptance that some forces could not be challenged, only endured. As the snow grew higher still, some residents began to dig temporary tunnels through the cliff. These narrow passages connected homes to neighbors, shops, and vital supply points, creating hidden corridors in an otherwise impassable city. Each tunnel was a careful work, dug with shovels, picks, even spoons in tighter spaces. They were narrow, forcing travelers to stupor crawl, the snow walls threatening to collapse at any moment. Yet, they offered a warmer, safer route for those who needed to move between buildings. Children giggled softly as they passed through the tight passages, their suppressed laughter a rare sound of levity in the white silence. Neighbors worked together to reinforce these tunnels, placing planks or packed snow to prevent cave-ins. In some areas, lanterns were placed along the paths, their flickering light guiding travelers, illuminating the smooth ice walls. Every successful passage was a small victory, a testament to human ingenuity and cooperation. Through these tunnels, supplies moved more efficiently, families visited each other safely, and the city found a hidden way to continue living beneath the snow. Even as the storm raged overhead and on the surface, in the narrow corridors carved by human hands, life went on, quiet and persistent. Some communities adapted faster than others, turning adversity into routine. In tightly minus-knit neighborhoods, residents developed a rhythm, taking shifts to shovel snow, carefully rationing food, maintaining the tunnels and pathways that connected house to house. Children were given small tasks, like carrying coal from one home to another or passing messages along safe tunnels, keeping them busy and close to warmth while teaching responsibility. In wealthier areas, hired men worked tirelessly to clear roofs and roads, ensuring fires had fuel and lanterns stayed lit. In tenements, communities relied on collective effort, pooling what little coal, wood, and food they had. Doors were left ajar so neighbors could duck in if needed, and makeshift signals, a lantern in a window, a light on a rooftop conveyed safety and guidance through the blinding snow. Even in the city's most rundown places, small victories were quietly celebrated. A cleared stairwell, a shared meal, a successfully fortified roof. Each act became a mark of resilience. The storm, though relentless, could not completely isolate the human spirit. It forced people to notice each other, to rely on each other, and through collective action, to preserve hope. And through these resilient communities, New York endured. The blizzard pressed down with white fury. Yet, in its shadow, humanity continued to forge connections, warmth, and survival. Along the waterfronts of the East River and Hudson, a desolate, earthbound scene now prevailed. Ferries stood motionless, their hulls sheathed in frost. Decks were buried under layers of snow, spushed out from the shores, forming jagged, slick shells that glittered under the pale sky. The sound of flowing water was replaced by the occasional groan and crack of ice shifting, a reminder of nature's constant presence. Dock workers who had survived the storm's first day now faced a new challenge, keeping goods moving despite the frozen piers and impassable ferries. Some carried cargo across icy paths, balancing buckets of coal or bundles of wood with extreme care. Free step was precarious. A slip could mean injury, or worse, a plunge into the icy water beneath thin ice. Passengers were stranded, waiting on piers that offered little shelter. Families huddled together as the wind cut sharply across their exposed faces, watching ferry crews and workers navigate the dangerous ice. The waterfront, normally a place of commerce and vitality, had become a silent, frozen expanse, dangerous and fascinating in its bleak beauty. Yet, even in this frozen dormancy, human determination remained. And women adapted, finding routes across the ice, building makeshift tramps, relying on lanterns and signals to guide movement. Life along the river's edge was paused, but not extinguished. The city's resilience extended to its very edges, where ice met human ingenuity. For the city's poorest residents, the blizzard posed a special danger. Crowded, drafty tenements were ill-equipped to withstand the relentless cold. Roofs sagged under the weight of snow, and they struggled to draw smoke. Thin walls let frost creep in. Families did their best to layer whatever they could find: blankets, newspapers, coats to preserve warmth. Yet, the nights remained bitterly long. Food shortages struck hardest here. Grocers' supplies ran out quickly, and the poor often relied on sharing scraps or making do with whatever they could cook. Children went hungry, small faces pale, lips blue, while parents struggled to ration meager portions to keep everyone alive. Every stick of wood, every lump of coal was precious. Neighbors often sharing the little they had, understanding that survival depended on cooperation. Some local charities and churches opened their doors, offering warmth, meals, and shelter. Yet, the scale of the storm meant it was impossible to accommodate everyone. Volunteers worked tirelessly, shoveling out paths, delivering supplies, guiding residents to temporary refuges. Their efforts were a lifeline against the overwhelming white tide. Even in scarcity and danger, these communities showed a quiet courage. Families pressed close, neighbors leaned on each other, and the city's most vulnerable found ways to endure. The blizzard, fierce and indiscriminate, revealed both the fragility and the resilience of human life at its hardest. The city's markets, usually bustling hubs of trade and chatter, had become ghostly spectacles. Stalls were buried under snow, their wares hidden under a glimmering white blanket. Vegetables wilted in the cold storage, fruit froze solid, fish lay encased in ice, glittering eerily under lantern or gaslight. Vendors who dared face the storm worked with dogged determination. Some cleared paths through drifts to display goods, while others rigged makeshift roofs with tarps or planks to protect what remained from the falling snow. The air smelled of frozen produce, coal smoke, and the damp pool of men laboring fiercely. Customers were few, moving cautiously over treacherous streets. Every purchase was considered, often ration, accompanied by quiet gratitude. Small exchanges, money for bread, coal, or vegetables, felt weighty and precious, as if each transaction was itself a tiny act of survival. This frozen marketplace, human resilience shone. Despite the storm's overwhelming force, the market remained a center of necessity, connection, and endurance. Through frost and snow, life continued, quiet, deliberate, and steadfast, sustaining body and spirit at the front of a winter-besieged city. Even the humble mailbox became a symbol of struggle and hope during the blizzard. Snow coated every surface, sometimes sealing the small or completely shut. Letters that did manage to cross the storm were often damp, frozen, or bent. Yet they carried immense meaning. News from afar, concerned greetings, reminders of affection between loved ones. Postal carriers braved hazardous paths to deliver them. Some walked miles through knee-deep snow, clutching bundles of mail to their chests, squinting against the swirling white. Others slid small packages along drifts on sleds, adjusting each delivery carefully to keep anything from being blown away. For families, even a single letter could bring comfort. Children would press close as parents read aloud from distant relatives. Parents would smile with quiet relief at news of safety. In these moments, the frozen mailbox was no longer metal. It became a lifeline, a channel of human connection the storm could not cut. Despite weariness and the ever-present cold, postal carriers and recipients alike demonstrated the city's resilience. The blizzard might have stopped commerce, travel, and conversation, but it could not extinguish the desire to communicate, to connect, or the hope carried in every letter delivered against impossible odds. Nightfall during the blizzard was particularly unnerving. Darkness enveloped the city, and the falling snow seemed to absorb all sound, leaving only the whisper of the wind and the occasional groan of ice-bound structures. Streets vanished under deep drifts. Lights grew dim under the white blanket, familiar landmarks lost to sight. Families huddled together in small rooms, stoves burning low to conserve fuel, lanterns flickering on windowsills. The silence of the snow created atmosphere that was surreal, almost magical, yet laced with anxiety. Every creak of the roof, every howl of the wind, reminded the inhabitants of the storm's continued presence. Children slept fitfully, dreaming of open skies and warm streets, while adults murmured reassurance, balancing fear with cautious vigilance. Wealthier homes, fires burned steadily, while in tenements, neighbors shared warmth, blankets, and stories to ward off cold and despair. Outside, those still moving on the streets relied on lanterns and ropes, feeling their way carefully through the bleached cityscape. Night during the blizzard was both beautiful and terrifying, a quiet, frozen world, suspended between survival and hope. In the darkness, the city seemed fragile, yet its people clung together, enduring, until the light of dawn might promise relief, if only for a moment. Firefighters faced unique and dangerous challenges during the blizzard. Snow-clogged streets, slowed horses, and buried fire hydrants under drifts, making even a short response to an emergency a monumental task. Yet, fires still happened. Stoves overheated, chimneys cracked. Accidents in kitchens or with lamps could spark small blazes that threatened entire buildings. Brave firemen, bundled in layers of woolen leather, struggled through knee-steep snow, dragging heavy hoses, navigating treacherous streets, equipment freezing in their hands. Every step was calculated. Every action weighed the risk of slipping, falling, or losing a critical tool in the snow. The air was biting, breath visible in icy gusts, while lanterns and torches barely illuminated the bleached streets, marking a path. Neighbors assisted when they could, clearing snow or guiding firefighters through familiar alleys and tunnels. Inside burning buildings, families watched anxiously, knowing rescue was near but also aware that time was measured in heartbeats and frozen minutes. Despite exhaustion and danger, the firefighters pressed on. Every life saved, every fire contained, was a small victory against the storm's overwhelming force. In these actions, the city witnessed courage and resilience, reminders that even when nature seemed insurmountable, human determination could still make a difference. The streetcars, once lifelines shuttling through the city, worn out, wrapped under layers of ice and snow, tracks disappeared beneath monumental drifts, was locked in frozen rails, the cars themselves groaning under the weight of accumulated ice. But for many, the sudden halt of these familiar conveyances meant isolation, as daily commutes, deliveries, and errands ground to a stop. Conductors and motormen worked tirelessly, chipping ice from tracks, oiling wheels, trying to clear enough space to move. When power failed, horses often used to assist struggled through deep snow, slipping, their riders patiently urging them forward. Every attempt to restore service met with partial success, followed by another layer of snow added relentlessly by the blizzard. Passengers adapted, turning to walking or relying on neighbors to share supplies. Talk of when the streetcars would run again became a daily refrain, often accompanied by advice on navigating the snow-choked streets safely. The children pressed faces to frosted windows, imagining the vehicles gliding down white streets, dreaming of the city in motion again. Despite the stoppage, the streetcars represented both frustration and hope. Their frozen stillness symbolized the blizzard's dominion. Yet, every effort to move them, every attempt to clear the tracks, even the act of repairing the machinery, was a quiet act of rebellion, a testament to the city's resilience and its determination to reclaim its lifelines. Along the boulevards and in the parks, trees had become frozen sculptures. Branches bowed low under the weight of ice and snow, bent so low that pedestrians had to duck or carefully squeeze past. Isakov hung like glass chandeliers, catching the light of lanterns and reek sunlight with a faint glitter, creating a surreal, otherworldly landscape. In some areas, the weight was simply too much. Branches broke with a muffled snap, showering the street below with snow and ice. Exertant workers avoided walking directly under these natural chandeliers, knowing a sudden collapse could be dangerous. Still, many paused to marvel at the captured beauty and caution. Children peered from windows, imagining winter kingdoms where forests glittered with frozen magic. The Duff, though aware of the danger, couldn't help but feel the quiet miracle of the city's transformation. Even in hardship, ice-minus latent trees offered a moment for reflection, a reminder that nature could create beauty even in its harshest expressions. Communities worked together to clear paths under the largest trees, ensuring safe passage for neighbors and supplies. These simple acts, combined with the serene, glittering streets, highlighted the balance between danger and beauty, struggle and appreciation, a city learning to navigate and endure in frozen splendor. As the blizzard entered its fifth day, frostbite became an increasingly common danger. Exposed skin froze quickly, and even a brief venture outside could lead to painful numbness or permanent damage to fingers, toes, and cheeks. Residents wrapped themselves in layers of clothing, scarves, mittens, and fur as best they could. Yet, the biting wind found every gap, Parents watched children closely, small hands tucked against cheeks or shoved deep into heavy mittens. Workers, mail carriers, and delivery men constantly checked each other for signs of frostbite, sharing warmth when possible, urging caution. Even brief exposure was dangerous, and awareness of this invisible threat hung over every journey, adding tension to the already arduous task of traversing deep snow. Lanterns and stoves offered warmth, but only within a small radius. In the spaces between these heat sources, the cold remained relentless, penetrating boots, coats, and gloves, reminding everyone of the storm's unforgiving reach. Hospitals treated a growing number of cases. Yet, for many, prevention was the only safeguard. Despite the danger, New Yorkers adapted. Moving quickly, layering carefully, and working in teams became essential. Those who ventured out understood the delicate balance between necessity and risk, learning firsthand that survival required equal parts courage and caution. As the storm showed no sign of relenting, some communities organized night watches. Groups of residents took turns patrolling the streets, checking on neighbors, reinforcing cleared snow paths, and keeping lanterns lit to guide travelers. These watches served both practical purposes and offered peace of mind, ensuring no one was truly alone in the silent white vastness. Thinned and women moved carefully, listening for cries for help or the groan of roofs under snow's weight. Lanterns cast flickering circles on the seemingly endless drifts, illuminating familiar buildings in a new, almost alien way. Even brief exchanges between watchers, a whispered question, a nod, a shared glance strengthened the bonds that held communities together. Children were kept close, often peeking from windows at the passing patrols, their imaginations turning these rounds into heroic journeys through frozen kingdoms. Adults, though weary, found comfort in shared responsibility, knowing vigilance could prevent tragedy and maintain morale. Through these night watches, communities became islands of safety and connection. The blizzard might have shrouded the city in cold and snow, yet human presence, diligence, and care created warmth, light, and reassurance even in the darkest hours. Water, at once simple necessity, became a daily challenge. Piles froze over, surfaces covered in thick ice, forcing residents to chip through or melt snow for drinking water. In tenements, buckets were filled carefully. Rationing became vital. A misstep, a dropped bucket, or a broken ice surface could mean lost water and added a hardship. Families took turns fetching water, often venturing into streets where snow was knee-minus deep, carrying heavy containers back to the relative warmth of home. The sound of ice cracking, water sloshing, and kettles hissing on stoves became daily rituals. The constant rhythm of survival. Children learned to help carefully, holding handles steady, observing the necessary patience and caution. Neighbors often cooperated, sharing water when a well was inaccessible or snow made a family's own source unreachable. Even in scarcity, community effort ensured everyone got at least enough to sustain life. Through the struggle, the simple act of drinking became profound. It reminded residents of the fragility of comfort, the necessity of adaptation, and the quiet endurance that kept them going day by day in a city buried under relentless ice and snow. In grief, fleeting moments, the blizzard would ease enough to create an eerie silence. The wind would die, snow would fall gently or stop altogether, and the city seemed suspended, frozen in time. Streets were white rivers, roofs glittered under a pale light, and even the low creak of buildings grew quieter, almost respectful of the momentary peace. Residents would often pause to notice the firemen. Families huddled around stoves, listening to the faint quiet outside, the occasional groan of ice or a collapsing roof the only reminder of the storm's presence. Children pressed faces to windows, marveling at the softened landscape, imagining worlds made entirely of snow. Adults allowed themselves a brief breath, a rare chance to rest without the immediate pressure of survival weighing on every action. Yet, even in the silence, caution remained. Snow could shift suddenly, drifts could collapse, the blizzard could return at any moment. Its respite was a reminder of beauty and fragility. A brief window for reflection, connection, and preparation for what came next. In these quiet interludes, the city held its collective breath, felt the storm's omnipresence even in its temporary absence, and gathered strength to withstand the next wave of white fury. By the fifth night, coal, the lifeline of warmth, grew scarce. Many households were already rationing fuel, now facing the reality that their stoves might not last the night. Coal piles outside were frozen solid, and deliveries were delayed or impossible due to snow-blocked streets. Residents measured every lump of coal carefully, fearing fires sparingly to preserve heat while still fighting off the creeping cold. Children were often given the task of bringing small pieces of coal to the stove or helping stack wood, learning the value of patience and careful stewardship. In some tenements, neighbors pooled their coal, ensuring every stove burned, however faintly. Through the bitter night, deliveries on the streets continued, though slow and dangerous. Nail carts cinched through deep snow, horses struggling with every step, drivers calling out against wind and snow. When a delivery finally arrived, gratitude was quiet and deep. Every lump of coal represented life, comfort, the survival in a frozen, isolated city. Even as scarcity tightened its grip, New Yorkers adapted. Ingenuity, cooperation, resilience turned fuel into a symbol of endurance. A reminder that even in the harshest winter, warmth both physical and emotional could be sustained. As dusk fell, the city's frozen shops took on a ghostly glow. Frost lamps flickered weakly through frosted windows, casting long shadows on snow-covered streets. Indoors, only a few stubborn vendors remained, tending to their last wares, bread carefully rationed, bundles of coal or scraps of vegetables to serve those who dared face the storm. The cold made every movement deliberate. Hands, gloved or not, moved slowly, tending stoves, stacking goods, ensuring supplies didn't freeze entirely. The air carried the smell of coal smoke, damp wool, and preserved food, a subtle reminder that life persisted within the relentless weight outside. Customers ventured out cautiously, slipping on ice, following paths carved by earlier travelers. Every purchase felt like a small victory, a necessary moment of survival, an act of rebellion against the immobilizing snow. Conversations were brief but warm. Words exchanged through scarves and layers carried gratitude and human connection. These frozen shops, New Yorkers found more than goods. They found hope, community, and the quiet resilience that sustained them. Even as night deepened and the storm continued its inexorable presence, churches became places of refuge during the blizzard, both physical and spiritual. As streets were blocked and homes grew cold, many residents turned to these buildings for warmth, prayer, and community. Stained glass windows glowed with candlelight, casting colored patterns on pews and walls, while fireplaces or stoves provided much-needed heat. Inside, congregations gathered quietly, sharing blankets, food, and reassurance. Pastors and ministers moved among the crowds, offering comfort and guidance, their voices a gentle counterpoint to the storm's low roar outside. Hymns were sung softly, each note echoing in the quiet sanctuary, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, faith and human connection endured. Children listened from laps or corners, eyes wide, watching the flickering flames and the gentle murmur of prayers. The adults found solace in shared patience, understanding that strength could be drawn from community and belief. Even in the most desperate hours, the churches offered temporary haven, a respite from the storm's unrelenting grip. The snowbound sanctuaries became beacons, both literal and symbolic, illuminating a city's resilience, compassion, and solidarity in the face of its coldest, harshest nights. Carriages, once the arteries of the city, were now anchored by snowdrifts and ice. Horses struggled against towering white walls, their breath plummeting thickly as drivers urged them on. Wooden wheels scraped violently on ice, some carriages tilting or becoming completely stuck, requiring several men to push them free. Yet, carriages remained essential. They carried food, coal, medicine, and occasionally passengers who had no other choice. Every journey was slow, deliberate, and fraught with danger. Yet, Persistence was the only option. Drivers navigated carefully, bundled in layers of woolen fur, lanterns swinging to light their way, eyes squinting against whirling snow. Passengers huddled under blankets, clinging to reins or carriage sides, faces pale but determined. Strength inside was fleeting, born from the labor of horses and the thin protection of layered cloth. Yet, every successful trip, however perilous, brought relief and sustenance to families waiting behind frosted windows. The frozen carriages were more than transportation. They were symbols of persistence, courage, and the slow, steady heartbeat of a city refusing to yield to the storm. As night fell over New York, tenements hummed with quiet activity. Families gathered around small stoves, sharing whatever warmth they could generate. The smell of thin soup and toasted bread mingled with the pungent scent of coal smoke, filling cramped apartments with reminders of sustenance and survival. Children pressed close to parents or siblings, blankets pulled tight, listening to stories told in low voices over the gentle crackle of the fire. Every sound, the distant howl of the wind, the low groan of snow-laden roofs, the creak of wooden floors was softened within the walls, creating a cocoon of relative calm amidst the storm. Neighbors checked on each other, offering a spare piece of wood, a bundle of coal, or words of comfort. Even in the most humble dwellings, acts of care and community provided warmth beyond what stoves could give. Laughter, though soft, occasionally pierced the winter silence, reminders of resilience, hope, and human connection. The tenements, though bare and cold, became sanctuary. They were spaces where the city's endurance could be felt in tangible ways, in shared warmth, in quiet vigilance, in the comforting knowledge that even in the harshest winter, no one faced the blizzard entirely alone. Finally, after days of relentless wind and snow, a faint light heralded the arrival of dawn. The blizzard had spent itself, leaving a transformed city in its wake. Streets were buried under white mountains, roofs glittered with ice, every tree and fence outlined in frost. The air was crisp and biting, carrying the scent of snow, coal smoke, and the faint warmth of human habitation. Residents emerged cautiously from their homes, as wide at the altered landscape. Children ran into the streets, testing snowdrifts, laughing as boots sank into the soft powder. The adults surveyed the damage, noting collapsed roofs, broken branches, and buried pathways. Yet, relief mingled with exhaustion. The storm was over, and the city, though battered, had endured. Neighbors helped one another, clearing paths, rescuing trapped animals, and checking on those who had struggled most. Shops slowly reopened, fires burned brighter, and the rhythm of life resumed, tentatively but firmly. Every small gesture, passing a loaf of bread, carrying a bucket of water, sharing warmth, was proof of resilience and hope. New York City had survived the Great Blizzard of 1888. It was left scarred, but it had also revealed the enduring strength, courage, and solidarity of its people. City forever marked by winter, yet defined by the human spirit that could withstand even the harshest cold. In the aftermath, as the storm finally exhausted its fury, a profound silence settled over New York City. The relentless wind had died, leaving only the soft whisper of shifting snow in the morning light. Streets, sidewalks, and alleys were buried under deep snow, turning familiar blocks into a brand new world. A city in pith, frozen in white stuff. Residents emerged slowly, moving cautiously over packed snow. Each step produced a faint crunch that echoed in the silence. People helped one another, clearing entrances, digging out passageways, rescuing horses, wagons, and carriages trapped by ice and snow's weight. Children marveled at the glittering landscape, their soft, bright laughter contrast to the subdued city. Homes and tenements bore the visible scars of survival. Sagging roofs, broken chimneys, windows thick with frost. Yet, within these structures, families shared quiet relief, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot drinks, murmuring thanks for having endured together. The city's rhythm was slow and methodical as life cautiously resumed. In this moment, the Great Blizzard of 1888 revealed not just destruction, it revealed resilience, compassion, and solidarity. The streets might be frozen, the nights long and painful, but the hearts of New Yorkers beat steadily beneath layers of wool, soot and frost, strong, enduring, and ready to reclaim the life and warmth of their beloved city. In the days following the blizzard, the city slowly began to reconnect. Families ventured further, checking on isolated neighbors, sharing supplies, and exchanging stories of survival. Paths through the snowdrifts were widened and reinforced, turning the tunnels and narrow trails dug during the storm into more permanent lifelines. Children, now more familiar with the challenges of snow, helped carry coal, shovel sidewalks, and guide small animals to safety. Their energy and curiosity brought a quiet joy to streets that had been heavy with white silence. The adults coordinated repairs, cleared debris, and ensured essential services, coal delivery, food distribution, now resumed as efficiently as possible. In these efforts, moments of connection became vital. Simple gestures, sharing a loaf of bread, a helping hand, a warm meal strengthened the bonds that had held communities together through the storm. Even residents of wealthier neighborhoods reached out to help those less fortunate, recognizing that survival had been collective, not individual. For these actions, the city healed not just physically but emotionally. The blizzard had isolated, challenged, and tested New Yorkers. Yeah. In its aftermath, human connection proved stronger than snow or ice. The resilience forged in frozen adversity became the foundation for a city that would continue to thrive again, day by day. As the storm finally subsided, New York's animals began to emerge from their hiding places. Horses, weary but alive, picked their way cautiously over cleared streets, their breath steaming in the crisp air. Dogs and cats, once lost or trapped, returned to familiar homes, guided by faint scents or careful calls from windows. People checked on their livestock, ensuring water and food were available, assessing any injuries from frost or exhaustion. Stray animals were guided to temporary shelters, neighbors sharing resources to ensure no creature was left behind. Even birds gradually returned, perching on icy branches, their chirps faint but persistent, remind us that life was recovering. The presence of animals brought comfort to the city. Children laughed at playful dogs. Adults smiled at returning horses. And the simple rhythms of feeding, tending, and observing these creatures reminded everyone that even after the harshest trial, life could endure. The city, blanketed in ice and snow, seemed quieter yet fuller, humming with the sound of recovery, the gentle noise of life, and the promise of a spring that, though distant, would eventually return. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, crews of workers, volunteers, and neighbors began the arduous task of clearing the streets. Shovels, picks, and horse-drawn plows moved in rhythm to the snowdrifts, turning the frozen cityscape back into pathways for human movement. Streets, once rivers of ice and snow, slowly transformed. Paths appeared between buildings. Crossings reopened. Main avenues, though still heavy with snow, allowed cautious passage. Children ran along cleared paths, testing their balance on icy edges, while adults carefully guided horses and wagons through the melting chaos. Every cleared street was a small victory. Shopkeepers reopened. Cold deliveries became more efficient. Neighbors could visit each other without navigating dangerous tunnels or risking frostbite. The city's pulse quickened, delivery and steady life gradually reclaimed a frost and expand. Even as drifts remained and roofs still sagged under ice, the clearing of the streets symbolized hope, endurance, and the relentless human effort to restore normalcy after nature's overwhelming display. After days of confinement, residents began to venture further into the city. Streets were still lined with towering snowdrifts. Roofs sagged under residual weight. Icicles hung like chandeliers from every eave. Yet, the desire to reconnect, assess damage, and restore life was stronger than the lingering cold. People moved cautiously, boots crunching on packed snow, scarves wrapped tight, eyes scanning for weak spots on icy sidewalks or collapsing roofs. Children railed behind adults, small hands clutching for warmth, their soft, bright laughter a contrast to the bleached streets. Vendors partially reopened their shops, offering necessities to those navigating newly cleared paths. Neighbors greeted each other with smiles and words of relieved ease. Stories of survival were exchanged, some with humor, others with odd, narrow escapes. The city felt alive again, not fully restored, but breathing, moving, and cautiously optimistic. Even in the lingering cold and towering snow, the act of venturing out became symbolic, an assertion that life, connection, and hope would continue despite the blizzard's fury. As residents explored the streets in the storm's aftermath, they discovered unexpected art left by the storm. Ice and snow had sculpted trees, fences, and rooftops into strange shapes, while drifts formed natural tunnels, arches, and glittering mounds. Some structures resembled towers, others delicate lace, and sunlight catching on icicles made the city seem dusted with diamonds. Children wandered eagerly, touching frozen formations, imagining kingdoms and castles, carefully navigating icy playgrounds. Adults paused too, admiring the surreal beauty created by nature's harsh hand, a reminder that even in destruction, there could be wonder. Neighbors took moments to appreciate these works, sometimes adding their own playful touches, building small snow forts or carving paths between drifts. The snow, once a relentless adversary, became a source of fascination, a bridge between survival and enjoyment. Amid strategy and fatigue, the city found magic. The blizzard's aftermath was not just a challenge to be endured, but a landscape to explore, reflect upon, and marvel at. Proof that even in the harshest winter, beauty could exist. In the days following the storm, shared meals became rituals of comfort across communities. Families and neighbors pooled what little food they had left, holding small gatherings in homes, tenements, and churches. Soup simmered on stoves. Bread was broken collectively, the warmth of companionship offsetting the lingering chill in the air. Children helped fetch water, stir pots, or set simple tables, learning the value of cooperation and care. Adults spoke in low tones, recounting stories of survival, clever improvisations, and small victories during the storm. Even those with almost nothing to share found a place, a warm corner, or a helping hand, emphasizing community over scarcity. The act of eating together restored more than physical energy. It rebuilt bonds frayed by isolation and adversity. Laughter, murmured conversation, and the simple clink of utensils created a rhythm of life, reinforcing that even after nature's fiercest trials, human connection remained unbroken. Through these shared meals, hope and resilience were nourished, feeding the spirit of a city that had endured one of history's harshest winters, along with the body. Once streets became passable, attention turned upward. Snow-laden roofs posed dangers, the weight of ice and drifts threatening collapse. Graffin's hired men carefully climbed up, chipping and suffering away. Now, everything steps were possible. The work was slow and deliberate. Every movement had to be precise to avoid slipping on icy shingles or accidentally cascading snow onto people below. Ladders leaned against sturdy walls, ropes were tied for safety, tools were handled cautiously. Families watched from below, assisting by carrying buckets of water, moving wood, or lighting lanterns to illuminate the work area. Clearing roofs was more than maintenance. It was a ritual of survival and reclaiming control over the environment. Every cleared roof marked safety, preparation for the next storm, and the perseverance of human ingenuity. In the silence following the blizzard, the act of restoration was both practical and symbolic, a promise that city life would continue, despite nature's power. Finally, the postal system began to function more reliably. After days of ordeal through deep snow and dicey streets, mail carriers resumed more consistent deliveries. Letters that had been delayed for days or weeks now arrived at doorsteps, bringing news, comfort, and connection. Children ran to fetch letters from frozen mailboxes, faces flushed with excitement, while adults carefully unfolded fragile envelopes, reading with relief, sometimes even laughter. In households where isolation had been most severe, a single letter could lift spirits and rekindle hope. The act of receiving mail became a celebration of resilience. Neighbors exchanged news of what had arrived, sharing information, marveling that despite the storm's severity, communication had persisted. Every delivery reinforced that the city was reawakening, slowly reconnecting, and restoring its lifelines. Through the reopening of mail routes, the blizzard's grip on daily life loosened, replaced by small triumphs, rake actions, and the quiet reassurance that the city was again capable of moving forward. At the following week, New York City was fully stirring from its frozen past. Snow still clung to roofs, streets retained the memory of drifts, and ice hung like ornaments from every eave. The life had returned. Shopkeepers opened their doors with cautious optimism. Children played in cleared yards. The rhythm of daily life slowly resumed. Neighbors checked on each other, ensuring everyone had recovered from the harshest days. Stoves in homes once again provided warmth and meals. In the city's hummed footsteps, horse-drawn wagons, distant voices returned like a comforting heartbeat. Even the storm's scars, broken branches, collapsed roofs, frostbitten landscapes were reminders of endurance, courage, and a city that had withstood one of history's most brutal winters. The Great Blizzard of 1888 changed New York, yet its people proved their strength. Through hardship, isolation, and relentless cold, they endured together, forged bonds, discovered resourcefulness, and emerged into the light with a renewed sense of hope. The city, frozen and battered, had awakened, not just to survive, but to thrive once more. Historical context: the Great Blizzard of 1888. The narrative you provided is a vivid, literary account of the Great Blizzard of 1888, also known as the Great White Hurricane. This was a catastrophic nor'easter that paralyzed the east coast of the United States from March 11–14, 1888. Here are the key historical facts that underpin the story. Unprecedented scale. The storm dropped 40–50 inches, 100–130 cm of snow in New York and New England, with drifts reaching 30–40 feet high. Thunes gusted over 80 mph, creating whiteout conditions and wind chills far below zero. A city unprepared. In 1888, New York's infrastructure was modern for its time, but fragile against such a force. The narrative accurately highlights the critical failures. Above-ground infrastructure. The elevated railways, and telegraph telephone lines were vulnerable and collapsed, severing transportation and communication. This disaster directly led to the push for underground subways and utility lines. In New York, horse-dependent transport, with streetcars and wagons immobilized, ground to a halt. The blizzard demonstrated the need for more resilient public transit. Political gridlock. The crisis exposed the ineffectiveness of competing city agencies. Street cleaning as under the corrupt Tammany Hall-controlled police department. This fueled the movement for consolidated city government, leading to the creation of Greater New York in 1898. Human toll. Approximately 200 people died in New York City, and over 400 along the East Coast. Many died from exposure, exhaustion, or accidents like collapses. The storm disproportionately affected the poor and poorly insulated tenements. Economic impact. The blizzard caused an estimated $25 million in damage, over $700 million today. It froze the New York Stock Exchange and halted commerce for days. Legacy of change. The blizzard was a pivotal event that forced modernization. 1. It accelerated plans for the New York City subway, which opened in 1904. 2. It proved the necessity of burying telegraph, telephone, and electrical wires, leading to mandated underground infrastructure. 3. It improved urban planning and disaster response protocols. 4. It entered American folklore as a benchmark for winter severity, often referred to simply as the Blizzard of '88. The story you shared masterfully captures the human experience of this historical turning point: the shock, the struggle for survival, the community solidarity, and the profound sense of a city being physically and socially reshaped by natural forces.